Hello. For the longest time, I thought my life was perfect. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for nearly 10 years. We had a cozy home, stable jobs, and a circle of friends who looked up to us as the couple that made it. Sarah was radiant, charismatic, and loved by everyone around us. She could light up a room with her laughter, and people always gravitated towards her. I was proud to be her husband. We had a beautiful son, Alex, who was the light of my life. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of all that we had built together, a life filled with love, laughter, and trust. But maybe I had been too trusting. Lately, I noticed small things that didn't quite add up. Sarah became distant, cold even, brushing off my attempts to connect or dismissing my questions with a quick laugh and a wave of her hand. She started working late more often, claiming her job was demanding more time from her. I tried to believe her, tried to ignore the growing discomfort I felt whenever she'd glance away from me, checking her phone a little too quickly. It wasn't just her attitude toward me. Her entire demeanor seemed to shift. When I confronted her, even gently, she'd become defensive, sometimes outright angry, accusing me of being paranoid or controlling. I couldn't understand it. This was the same woman who once promised that we'd face every challenge together, who used to hold my hand and tell me I was her rock. The distance grew, and with it, an emptiness began gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, terribly wrong. My instincts told me that there was more to Sarah's behavior than work stress or the usual strains of marriage. And yet, I still wanted to believe that the woman I loved was still the same person I had trusted all these years. The more I tried to ignore the signs, the harder it became to keep up the facade of our perfect life. Sarah was always guarded with her phone, taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. If it buzzed, she would glance at me before checking it, her expression always shifting to something that looked like guilt or discomfort. One Friday night, she said she was going out for a girls' night. Normally, that would have seemed fine, but recently, her girls' nights were happening more frequently. I tried to push down the rising suspicion, telling myself that she deserved a night off to unwind. I stayed home with Alex, reassuring myself with the image of Sarah out laughing with her friends, unwinding from a tough week. But curiosity gnawed at me. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her social media. Nothing was unusual there, just photos of our life together, our son, the typical happy family snapshots. But as I scrolled through, I noticed a new name that kept popping up on her posts, a man named Marcus. The comments were harmless enough on the surface, but something about them felt off. The words themselves weren't suggestive, but they carried a familiarity, an ease that didn't sit well with me. I decided to leave it alone, hoping that maybe I was reading too much into things. I wanted to believe her, but as the weeks went on, I kept finding more clues, little things that didn't make sense. Every time she mentioned girls' night, her tone was off. She was no longer the same Sarah who used to share every detail of her day with me. And one day, I stumbled upon a small receipt from a hotel, tucked away in her bag. The date matched one of her supposed girls' nights. My stomach dropped, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Was she really staying at a hotel with someone else while I was at home with our son? I wanted to confront her right then, but a part of me hesitated. If I was wrong, I'd be betraying her trust. But if I was right, then everything I thought I knew about my wife was a lie. I decided I needed proof. After finding that hotel receipt, my mind spun with questions, and I couldn't just sit with them anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it tore me apart. I decided I'd confront her, but not yet. I needed something concrete, something that left no room for lies or excuses. So, I waited for my chance to dig deeper. The opportunity came a few nights later. Sarah had put Alex to bed and was in the shower, her phone lying unattended on the kitchen counter. My heart hammered as I picked it up. I felt like I was crossing a line, but I reminded myself that she crossed it first, and I needed answers. The phone was locked, of course, but I knew the passcode. It was Alex's birthday. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. It felt surreal, like I was in someone else's life, someone who didn't trust the person he was supposed to trust most in the world. Finally, I entered the code and unlocked the phone. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Messages from friends, work emails, group chats with family. But then I saw it. A messaging app one hadn't noticed before. It was one I'd heard of, a popular app often used for privacy. My stomach twisted as I clicked on it. There, at the top of her chats, was Marcus's name. My hands trembled as I opened the conversation. What I saw left me breathless. The messages were explicit, intimate, things she'd never said to me, not even in our most private moments. They'd shared pictures, too, the kind of photos that no husband should ever see his wife send to another man. The more I scrolled, the more I realized that this wasn't just an affair. It was a double life, one she had hidden from me with chilling ease. My mind raced, torn between disbelief and fury. How long had this been going on? Who was Marcus, really? Was he someone from work? Someone from our friend circle? I read on, desperate for context, but what I found only made things worse. In one message, she had thanked Marcus for the generosity he'd shown her. My hands shook harder. Generosity? What did that mean? As I kept reading, I found clues that suggested their relationship was far from simple. She was doing more than meeting him at hotels. She was acting in intimate videos he was paying for. I was stunned, sickened by what I was reading. This was about money, too. I read through texts detailing sessions, terms of payment, even explicit discussions about what he wanted from her next time. She seemed more than willing, even enthusiastic, in ways she hadn't been with me in years. My mind went numb as I read her words that made her sound like a stranger, like someone I had never known. Was this really the same woman I had spent a decade loving and building a family with? Just then, I heard the water in the shower turn off. My heart nearly stopped as I realized she'd be out in seconds. I quickly locked the phone and put it back exactly as I'd found it, then hurried to the living room, where I tried to calm my racing mind. When Sarah walked into the room, she greeted me with a casual smile, like she hadn't just shattered our life with her betrayal. I could barely look at her. She must have sensed something was off because she raised an eyebrow, but I forced a weak smile and pretended to be engrossed in a movie. Inside, I was anything but calm. I was burning with anger, hurt, and disbelief. Every smile she gave me felt like mockery, every casual touch a lie. The betrayal was more than I could take, and yet I knew I had to keep it together. For Alex, if for nothing else. But in that moment, something broke inside me. The life I thought I had, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. And I knew, in the deepest part of my heart, that there would be no going back. From that moment on, I wasn't just a husband trying to save a marriage. I was a man on a mission to reclaim his life, whatever the cost. In the days that followed, I was consumed by my discovery. The shock left me hollow, and all I felt was a cold, relentless need for answers. I watched Sarah closely, analyzing her every move, every glance. With the mask of normalcy I wore for Alex's sake, I became an actor in my own home, pretending everything was fine even as my marriage disintegrated behind the scenes. But Sarah was a good actress, too. She carried on with her life as if nothing had changed, still giving me the occasional strained smile or routine kiss on the cheek. But I couldn't look at her without seeing the messages I'd read, the photos she'd sent to another man. Her betrayal replayed in my mind on a loop, and every affectionate gesture she offered me felt like a slap in the face. I became obsessed with piecing together the timeline, replaying every argument, every moment of distance between us. How had I missed it? I looked back at the subtle shifts, the work trips, the late nights, the guarded phone. She'd been so convincing, so ordinary, and I had been too willing to see her as my loving wife, even when the signs were right in front of me. One night, after putting Alex to bed, I returned to our bedroom and found her typing on her phone, a slight smile playing on her lips. Seeing that smile on her face, knowing it might not be for me, made me feel physically ill. The air between us was heavy, suffocating, as I waited for her to finish and put the phone down. When she noticed me watching her, she asked, "Is everything okay?" Her question felt like a test. Part of me wanted to confront her right there, to unleash all the anger I'd been bottling up. But I held back, keeping my expression neutral. "Just tired from work," I said, brushing it off. She nodded, looking almost relieved. But I could see it now, the cracks in her mask. She was hiding something from me, and while she thought she was safe behind her secrets, I could see the small hesitations, the faint traces of guilt that slipped through when she thought I wasn't looking. But every time she hid behind those lies, it only fueled my resolve to uncover the whole truth. One evening, as she headed out for another supposed girls' night, I decided to follow her. I told her I'd be home with Alex, then waited a few minutes after she left, my heart pounding as I slipped out the door and into my car. I followed her from a distance, careful to keep out of sight. It felt surreal, like I was watching a stranger. She drove to an upscale part of town and parked outside a hotel, the same one I'd seen on that first receipt. She walked inside, her posture relaxed, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I parked across the street, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and watched the minutes tick by. About half an hour later, a man approached the hotel entrance. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him. It was Marcus, the man from her messages, dressed sharply, exuding confidence. He strode into the hotel without hesitation, disappearing through the doors just as Sarah had. In that moment, my anger became something darker, more controlled. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about respect, dignity, the life we'd built that she was casually destroying. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I drove home, the plan forming in my mind. It wasn't enough to know she betrayed me. I needed her to face the consequences of every lie she told. Every time she looked me in the eyes and smiled as though everything was fine. The mask would slip, and when it did, everyone would see her for who she truly was. With the pieces coming together, I knew what I needed to do. Anger alone wouldn't be enough to reclaim my life. I needed hard evidence. It wasn't just for me. I wanted Sarah to face the full reality of her actions, to have no way to twist the truth or make excuses. This time, she couldn't just claim it was a mistake, or that I'd misunderstood. She'd chosen this deception, and I was determined to make her face it. That night, as she returned home from the girls' night, with a faint smile and a casual greeting, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband. I nodded, asked her how her night was, and watched her closely. Her lies rolled off her tongue so easily, so casually, that it took all my strength not to show my disgust. She had no idea I knew where she'd been or with whom. The next day, after she left for work, I started preparing. I ordered a hidden camera online, something small and discreet that I could place around the house without her noticing. I didn't know if she'd ever bring Marcus here, but I couldn't take that chance. If I was going to confront her, I needed everything documented. While waiting for the equipment, I searched her laptop, looking for more traces of her double life. She wasn't particularly tech-savvy, so it didn't take long to find remnants of her messages. I went through her browser history and saw she had logged into that same messaging app on her computer a few times. I managed to access some archived messages she must have overlooked in her attempt to cover her tracks. Reading those messages was like pouring salt on an open wound. It was clear now that Marcus was no casual fling or mistake. He was deeply woven into her life. Someone she met regularly, someone who had become a fixture in her routine. She wrote to him about her days, shared complaints about stress at home, which was, I realized, her twisted way of referring to our marriage. She confided in him, laughed with him, planned with him, and it was about more than physical connection. She described the money she'd received from him, saying it was a relief to have something just for herself. I took screenshots of every damning message, saving them to a secure folder I knew she'd never find. There was enough to paint a picture of exactly who she'd become, a woman I didn't recognize, who could justify betraying her husband and son for money and lust. It made me question if she'd ever truly loved me, or if I'd simply been a convenience for her until something better came along. The day the camera arrived, I waited until she'd left for her yoga class, then set it up in our bedroom and in the living room, places she was most likely to talk privately if she ever did bring Marcus here. Every move I made felt calculated, a step closer to the truth. I was no longer just a husband fighting for his marriage. I was a man reclaiming his dignity. In the days that followed, I watched her carefully. I waited for her to slip, to let something slip that I could capture on video or audio, to have undeniable proof of her betrayal. She was still leaving for her girls' nights and returning home late, too comfortable in her secrets, thinking I was none the wiser. But the cracks were starting to show. When I was around her, I could see that hint of guilt, even if she tried to cover it up with smiles and small talk. It was almost laughable, how easily she could smile at me while lying through her teeth. One evening, when she was out again, I reviewed the footage and checked my file of screenshots. The collection of evidence was growing, solidifying my case against her. But the more I found, the more I realized something else. This wasn't just about catching her or proving she was unfaithful. I wanted her to feel the weight of every single choice she'd made. And as I pieced everything together, the anger in me settled into a quiet, unbreakable resolve. I would confront her soon, but not in private. No, this betrayal would be seen by everyone she cared about. When the time came, her carefully constructed world would collapse, and everyone would see her for the person she'd become as days passed. My plan grew clearer. I'd make sure Sarah's lies were exposed not just to me, but to the people she had fooled. The friends who thought she was a doting wife, the family members who believed in our happy marriage. I wanted them all to know. She had chosen to betray me, and I would choose to hold her accountable in front of everyone she cared about. But before that, I needed to know the full scope of her actions. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus might not be the only man, or that the money exchange was only a small part of something larger. The more I looked, the more the possibility of secrets within secrets loomed over me. I decided to hire a private investigator, someone with experience uncovering the truth in situations like this. I found a reputable investigator online, a man named James who specialized in affairs. After a quick call, I arranged to meet him in person at a cafe downtown. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt hiring someone to spy on my own wife, but that guilt was quickly eclipsed by the memories of her betrayal. I needed to do this, if not for me, then for Alex and for the life she had fractured. At our meeting, James listened without interrupting as I laid out the situation. I told him about the hotel receipt, the messages, the man named Marcus, and the payments. He took notes, his face impassive, though I could tell he'd heard stories like mine before. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "I'll be thorough," he assured me. "From what you're saying, it sounds like there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Affairs can get complicated, especially when money's involved." I handed him all the information I'd gathered, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time, it felt like I had an ally in this fight, someone who could confirm the truth beyond what I had seen with my own eyes. The next few days were tense. I went through the motions at home, playing the part of a loving husband while keeping a close eye on Sarah. The wait was agony, each hour dragging by as I tried not to dwell on what else James might uncover. I couldn't shake the anxiety that his findings would reveal even darker secrets. Finally, James called. My hands shook as I answered, bracing myself for whatever he'd found. "I have some information," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I think it's best we meet in person." We arranged to meet at the same cafe. I arrived early, my mind racing through every possible scenario. What had he found? Was there another man? Was Marcus part of something even worse? By the time James walked in and sat across from me, my heart was pounding. He slid a folder across the table. "There's more to your wife's connection with Marcus than just an affair," he began, his voice low. "Marcus is not just her lover. He's part of an underground group that produces explicit content, and he's been using her videos to earn money. It's a small operation, but it's profitable, and your wife seems to be fully aware of it." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Sarah had been willingly involved in this? She wasn't just selling herself for a bit of cash. She was part of something larger, something that went against every moral boundary I thought she'd had. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, was willingly a part of this exploitative scheme? "Marcus has other women he's seeing too," James continued, "but your wife appears to be one of his main contributors. I've included screenshots of their recent messages and financial exchanges. It's all there." I opened the folder, my hands trembling as I scanned the contents. Screenshots, bank transfers, even images from their messaging app. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. I felt hollow, as though every ounce of love, every memory I had of Sarah, was being erased. replaced by a stranger who traded her integrity for money and cheap thrills. "I'm sorry," James said, his voice softer. "I know this is hard to hear, but from what I can see, she's in deep, and she's not just a bystander. She's actively involved in these choices." I nodded, closing the folder. I was done grieving, done feeling shocked. Now, with the final pieces in place, I felt something new, a grim determination to see this through. I thanked James, shook his hand, and walked out of that cafe, ready for the next step. This wasn't just about confronting her. It was about exposing her, letting her face the consequences of everything she'd done. Returning home, I felt like I was in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings. The weight of the truth hung over me, a dark cloud that shifted everything I thought I knew about Sarah. I went through the motions of daily life, helping Alex with his homework, making dinner, sharing polite conversation with Sarah as though she hadn't turned my world upside down. But I knew I couldn't keep this charade up for much longer. The evidence was overwhelming. I had enough proof not just for a confrontation, but to ruin the double life she'd been living. As I watched her across the dinner table, a plan began to take shape in my mind, one that would strip away her mask completely. I decided that I wouldn't confront her alone. I wanted her family, our friends, everyone she cared about, to know who she had become. Over the next few days, I quietly prepared. I gathered copies of the evidence, arranging everything in a way that told the full story from start to finish. I knew it would devastate her family, especially her parents, who'd always looked at me with pride and called me the son they never had. I thought about telling them privately, softening the blow, but the hurt and anger inside me wanted her to experience the full shock of her lies coming to light all at once. The opportunity to reveal it all came sooner than I expected. Sarah had organized a small dinner party for her birthday, inviting close friends and family. She'd been planning it for weeks, texting people to make sure they'd show up, calling it a celebration of life, family, and love. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. The night of the party arrived, and I kept my emotions under control as guests started trickling in. Everyone greeted us with warmth, telling Sarah how lucky she was, how they admired the strong bond we had as a couple. Little did they know that by the end of the night, those smiles and congratulations would turn to disbelief and horror. The party went smoothly at first, the room buzzing with laughter and light-hearted conversation. I forced myself to stay calm, playing the dutiful husband, mingling and chatting as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was counting down the minutes. When it was time for dessert, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising my glass. "Before we bring out the cake, I'd like to say a few words," I announced, catching Sarah off guard. She smiled at me, clearly not suspecting anything. While everyone else fell silent, their faces expectant. I spoke about love, loyalty, and the sanctity of marriage. I spoke about the trust we place in the people we love and how fragile it all can be. Sarah's smile began to falter, a slight confusion crossing her face as I continued. "Tonight, I want to share a different kind of truth with everyone here," I said, pulling out a folder from behind me, the one containing all the evidence. The room went silent as I handed the folder to Sarah. "I think it's time you tell everyone what's really been going on," I said, my voice hard but steady. She looked down at the folder, her face pale, and began flipping through the pages. I watched as her expression changed from confusion to shock, her hands trembling as she took in the messages, the photos, the bank transactions. She looked up, her eyes wide with horror as everyone stared at her, waiting for an explanation. Sarah tried to speak, stammering as she looked around, desperate for some way to explain herself. This isn't what it looks like," she said, but her voice was weak, filled with panic. I could see her mind racing, struggling to come up with an excuse, a way out. But there was none. The evidence was too damning. The room erupted into whispers, and her mother's voice broke through, sharp with disbelief. "Sarah, what is this? What have you done?" Her father looked away, his face a mask of disappointment, unable to meet her gaze. Our friends stared at her, horrified, and I could see the judgment in their eyes, the betrayal they felt on my behalf. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Please, let me explain," she whispered, reaching for my hand, but I pulled back, cold and unmoved. Explain to them, Sarah. Tell everyone here why you sold our marriage, our family, for money. Tell them about the life you've been living behind all of our backs. Her friends, once her closest confidants, were stunned. One by one, they started to speak, voicing their disbelief and anger, calling her selfish, dishonest. Sarah's face crumpled, her world falling apart in front of everyone she loved. There was no escape, no room for denial. She was exposed. With everyone staring at her, Sarah finally broke down. I'm sorry, she stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks. It just happened. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I could keep it separate. Separate? Her mother repeated, her voice laced with anger and sadness. You've destroyed everything, Sarah. You betrayed your husband, your family. For what? For money? Sarah's attempts to explain herself only made things worse. She tried to justify it, claiming she had felt trapped, that she needed something for herself. Her words rang hollow, selfish, and everyone could see through them. It was a mistake, she pleaded, looking at me with tearful desperation. Please, just give me a chance to fix this. For Alex. For us. But I'd heard enough. The time for forgiveness had passed. There was nothing left of the love I'd once felt for her, only a sense of finality. I stood up, my voice calm and unwavering. I'm done, Sarah. Our marriage, everything we built together, it's over. After I walked out, the party quickly dissolved into chaos. Guests began leaving, shaking their heads in disbelief, muttering to each other about how they never would have expected this from Sarah. Her parents stayed, devastated, unable to believe what had just unfolded. As I drove home, I felt an odd mixture of relief and emptiness. The burden of pretending was gone, but with it went the life I thought I had. I returned to the empty house, sitting in silence, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. The next morning, I woke up to the reality that I'd have to explain this to Alex. He was too young to understand fully, but I knew I couldn't shield him from the changes that were coming. I sat him down, gently explaining that things were going to be different, that Mommy wouldn't be living with us anymore. He looked up at me with wide, confused eyes, his innocence tearing at my heart. I promised him that I'd always be there, that he was my world. And as I held him close, I made a silent vow to protect him from the fallout of Sarah's choices. I filed for divorce the following week. Sarah tried reaching out, begging for forgiveness, promising to change, but I was done. There was nothing left to salvage. My lawyer made sure she'd leave with little to nothing. The only thing I wanted was full custody of Alex. Sarah contested it at first, but with the evidence I'd collected, there was no judge who would side with her. She signed the papers, defeated, her expression hollow and broken. It was the last time I saw her. Life without Sarah felt strange at first, like I was learning to breathe again. But slowly, I rebuilt. I threw myself into my work, spent as much time as I could with Alex, surrounding him with the love and stability he needed. Friends reached out, offering support, helping me piece together a new life. Over time, the anger faded, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward. I'd been scarred, but I was stronger now, more aware of the importance of trust and integrity. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. I became closer to Alex than ever, rediscovering the joy of fatherhood. My friends remained by my side, loyal through everything. I had lost a wife, but I had gained a new sense of self, of purpose. One evening, as I watched Alex play, laughing freely, I realized that I was finally at peace. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt, they were behind me. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to build, and I would make sure it was a future filled with honesty, strength, and love. Bye-bye.